Hello everyone! So in today's video I'll try my best to help you starting out to paint with oils by explaining some painting methods, hacks and tips that are important in my opinion when it comes to painting. So let's do this! So before I share any tips and hacks and methods for oil painting, I want to talk about which materials I used. I have mainly used for the sketch 2 HB pencils, very normal ones, a rubber, and also this rubber right here, which I use for cleaning off any excess of the graphite, and a sharpener. Then I have a very thin canvas actually. You can also use any canvas you want. I just like these thin ones, they are handy in my opinion. And I have this canvas holder. I will talk about why I use this later on, but I think it's very helpful. Also I have this color palette. You don't need to wrap it in foil. This is just another hack I will briefly talk about later. And this one is for mixing. I didn't use it that much, but if you want to, if you think it's fancy, you can also buy that. Then I have a brush set, but these two brushes right here, they came with my all painting set from the brand I will link down below, which I mainly used. But yeah, the brush set is also amazing because you have many different sizes and things you could use the brushes for. Then an all paint thinner is very important. The importance of this one will be covered on later in the video, but I used this one right here. And lastly I have these all paints. They are also from the brand down below, and I only used these and mixed the other colors I needed. Now on to my first tip. I say this I think every video because it goes for every medium and you really should consider this. Layout and sketch. Do this with a pencil or choose a color from your oil paints, and you can thin out that color and just draw the outlines and basic shapes that are prominent and necessary for the scenery, because we're talking about landscapes here and there are obviously objects involved with that. So yeah, this is just there to help you know where everything goes, and so you don't just start painting everything without having an idea of your scenery. My second tip is to not assume the right color, but rather look at your reference and really try figuring out the exact color through comparison. So if the color you need isn't available to you through the ones you own, just through the tubes, you adjust it. So that's where mixing comes into place, as I said. And I want to make a video only on mixing sometime, but for now what you need to know to get started is don't mix the colors you need on the canvas. Rather get a board, sheet or plate to do that on. And with this you really don't need an expensive art supply. Just take anything with a smooth and plain surface. Even a simple plate could work. In my case, I took a color palette and put a transparent foil over it, as I showed you in the beginning. And this is actually a great hack for anyone who doesn't want to be bothered with cleaning their wooden color palette or just their palette in general after painting, because you can simply remove the foil and throw it away and reuse your palette as much as you want to without having these annoying colors on there. And your palette stays clean during all of that. But now back to mixing. So you don't want to mix on the canvas. Mix on a smooth surface instead. Just work as much as possible on your mixing palette to get the right color you need. Because if you do that on the canvas, you can't go back. The color is applied, and mixing it on the canvas will be a lot harder, especially if you're a beginner. Yeah, and once the color is adjusted by you on the palette, just apply it to the canvas. And for mixing in general, I'd advise you to use a paint thinner, as I briefly talked about in the beginning. My paint thinner really changed my whole painting experience, because back when I was younger, I didn't know much about painting at all, and I would almost forcefully try to create the colors I needed. But with a paint thinner, it's a lot easier since the colors from the tube aren't as thick anymore, which makes mixing a lot harder. So with the paint thinner, you really thin out that color, and it's more like watercolor, painting with watercolor, but you still have that oil painting effect. And that's really great, especially for beginners, because you can adjust how thick or how thin your brush strokes are, basically. My third tip is to block in, and I also talk about this very often because blocking in is very important with every medium and with all paintings especially, because as with every painting you put in details at the end. But in order to come to that end, you need the objects themselves painted. So start with the darkest parts of the painting and block them in. I didn't. I started with the sky, I believe, and moved on with whatever I saw, which object needed color, But if you're a beginner and you don't know where to start, just start with the darker parts and then move on to the colors from the middle range and block in colors of the lowest value at the end. So if you haven't heard of the term value yet and you don't know what values are, let me quickly explain. It's basically how bright or dark a certain color is. For example, in the painting I'm making on screen, there are many different green tones, brighter and darker ones. And that's essentially due to the values you need. Things that are dark but closer to you, like the bush next to the house, will be a little darker than the mountains who are the furthest away, simply because the mountains aren't in focus that much. But also with the house you can see how values play a big role. The sides of the house, which the sunlight will naturally hit, are higher in value than the ones where a shadow is created. I really hope that I'm explaining it understandably, but I can definitely make a more in-depth video on this and how to mix colors correctly. But what color blocking is used for is to lay down the colors most apparent to you. If you're taking a look at my painting as an example, for color blocking I only used one very bright blue for the sky, as I thought this specific blue tone would resemble the sky I was trying to create the most, without thinking about the values too much yet. And the same thing goes for the house, the clouds, the grass, and everything else. And that already helps bringing in contrast at an early state of the painting. And this is also what the term color hue or color wheel refers to. The wheel shows a gradation or variety of colors, and it's used for classifying objects. If you take a look at an apple, for instance, you can see loads of red tones, maybe even a bit yellow and green. But if you break it down in order to paint the apple, you start with the colors most apparent to you, which are the base colors essentially. Then you move on with the rest, which is where values come into place, and you need to add areas where the lighting hits the surface and the apple will reflect that light and will appear brighter. Then the shadows that are created through that light by using darker values, and so on. If you use this method for every object, you'll be able to paint it the way you want to with enough practice. My next tip doesn't exactly have to do with painting itself, but it's still important when you want to draw or paint. So take breaks in between to take a look at your painting to spot mistakes. This is also why I have this canvas holder and my face is further away from the painting and I have an overlook of the whole painting the entire time. This is especially important in the early stages of your painting, because if you're constantly painting without even a short 5-minute break to look at your piece and absorb what you've just created, you start familiarizing with what you're seeing in front of you and basically become numb to seeing any mistakes you might be making. So at least lean back in your chair for some time in between, or if you're painting standing up, take a few steps back from time to time in order to have a better overview. Because what counts at the end is the entire landscape and not a single mountain, house or tree you're making in detail, because the detail will not be as important as the entire thing. Therefore, don't get caught up in these details, especially when you're not at the detailing stage yet, and rather consider the whole piece at all times. The next thing I want to briefly educate you on is thick on thin. Now, maybe you've already heard of this term, but if you're like me and you've never heard it used by another artist, let me explain. So remember how I talked about the importance of mixing your colors if you want to get the right ones? And also how much paint thinner can make a difference with that? Then hear me out on this one. Paint thinner is especially needed in the beginning of the painting. When you're blocking in your colors, you should avoid applying too thick of a coat to the canvas. Rather build up your colors from time to time, and that's what thick over thin refers to. Build up thin layers and use thicker layers later on. Your details should also be done by using more of the needed color, so thicker color, which means thin it out less for the details and thin it out more for the blocking in stage. These were all of my tips now, and this is my finished piece. I just wanted to show you a close-up. Here you go. That's it. Now, these were some hacks and tips for beginners within oil painting. I hope they were helpful to you, even though I just quickly went over them and didn't make a whole detailed video on it. And as always, please consider subscribing for more future art tips like these and other art-related content. My aim on this channel is to make learning drawing and painting skills in any medium more accessible to everyone. And if you support my idea, I would also be very, very grateful if you could maybe head over to my Instagram and give me a quick follow. I post all my artworks on there. There's almost always additional content in my stories and I interact with my followers. So if that sounds good to you, go check it out. But yeah, for now, see you then.